Well, good morning. How are we doing today? All right. You know, you may have noticed it's a little empty here today, and there's a reason for that, and it has everything to do with what we're going to talk about today and talked about last week and are going to talk about next week. And it's this thing that we are starting to call around here volunserve. Kind of this combination between volunteering and bright group today, right? And so here's just some quick definitions. Volunteer means to freely. Yeah, how like that? You know, read out loud. Volunteer, to freely offer to do something, right? And to serve means to be of service to be of use to help, assist, aid, make a contribution to. And we recognize that in a church organization, it requires both those things together to make stuff happen. It's not just about volunteering, and it's not just about serving. It's about those two things together. It's about freely offering to do something, which, by the way, you've already become a volunteer simply by showing up today. Because nobody in this room has to be here unless you don't have a driver's license. You're not a volunteer today, but you're probably not paid either. But everybody else, you're here voluntarily, right? Nobody forced you to come here. At least hopefully nobody forced you to come here. But this idea to do something freely, but also this idea of serving, that it's more than just doing something freely, but with an attitude of service, of trying to be of use, of help, of assistance, of making a contribution. And you put those two things together, and it's really the basis. It's really the basis of what we do here at New Hope. It's how we function here. Because we really only have like 7 of us on the payroll here. Everything else that happens in this building during the week, and even especially here on Saturday, is because of volunteers. I want you to look around for just a moment. Everybody look back that way. Look at the people on the cameras, right? The people upstairs. Thankfully, you can't hear all the people in kids' church right now, but there's people down there. And you ought to be really thankful that at this moment, there's a number of adults that are volunteering someplace for the weekend with about 70 or 80 kids camping for the whole weekend. That's why you're here and they're there, right? Because you're glad somebody would go spend that amount of time camping with all these kids. And here's the amazing thing about this. If you're a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, this idea of volunteering is huge. But it's so huge, yet for most of us, we don't think much about it. In fact, we think if we just showing up, you know, we come to church and occasionally we'll help out here, maybe put a few dollars in the bucket when it comes by, maybe go online and help out. You know, we think that, hey, I've shown up and I've kind of done my thing. And the reality is, if you've missed this part, you missed a very important key piece back. We're going to see what Jesus says about this in just a moment. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're not kind of at that space, if you're just here today because, you know, somebody offered you lunch later, or, you know, she's cute, and because she's cute, you're kind of hanging with her right now and you're here. Hey, you get to decide if anything I say today makes any sense to your life. But even for you, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, this idea of serving, of volunteering, of going and giving something freely, but more than just freely, of having a rationale, a reason behind it, that I'm trying to help somebody else. You need to decide if that works for you or not. But here's the reality. Some of you in this room this morning, and some of you watching online around the country, around the world, some of you are really good at planning, right? And some of you are married to people who are really good at planning. And you know exactly who they are, right? Because you never have to plan anything, because they have it all planned out, right? Some of us have great plans about, you know, our finances, how we're going to get out of debt, how we're going to save for retirement, how we're going to go on vacation, how we got all this stuff. Some of you are great about schooling, about this is what I have to do, and then when I take this, I'm going to that. Some of you, your schooling plan is simply, I just want to be out of school, right? You know, you ask somebody what they're doing this summer out of school. Some have it all lined up. Well, I'm going taking these classes. I'm going to go do this project. I'm going to do this. Others of you, your idea of a summer break is, and plans are simply, sleep. I have no plans for the summer. That's my plan, just to be out of school. Some of you have relationship plans. Some of you have career plans. Some of us are great at the planning part, but not so great at the actual following through part, but we feel because we've done the planning, we're really good at this whole kind of thing. But here's the thing, and I want to just make a guess today. This is a guess that I have for the vast majority of us sitting here today, that you don't have a plan for serving. That when you hear a need, if it kind of comes up, you'll kind of make a decision at that moment, say, I might help out, or I'm not. But most of us have never sat down and thought about what would it look like? What would it mean to my life? How would that work into my life to kind of carve out some time, carve out some space in order to give something that I have, that's part of me, my time, my energy, and to give it away for a reason to try to help somebody else. And so today we're going to talk about that. But before we get there, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray another time together, all right? Lord, we are thankful. We're thankful for the people that serve us. We're thankful for the people at this church who volunteer. The people who greeted us, the people who right now have the sounds and the lights and have set the temperature. The people right now that for some of us are taking care of our kids. For some of us have their kids away for the whole weekend, and we are really thankful for them. But this whole idea of serving, and the whole idea of why to serve, at times it's really hard for us to figure out. And so today I just ask that you would use these words of your son Jesus, these words he said to his closest followers, and use them somehow to not only motivate us, but to help us think again about what the whole purpose of position and power and prestige and the stuff we have and the knowledge we've gained, what the whole purpose of all that stuff really is. So we ask you to be with us now and help us to hear you clearly in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along, we were over in Luke chapter 22, beginning in verse 21. Let me give a little background. Jesus is now sort of heading to the last couple of days of his life here on this planet before he faces crucifixion. And he's been talking to his 12 closest followers about what this is going to look like, and he's been trying to prepare them for them. And the reality is, every time he's talked about it, if you've read those stories, you know, they haven't really been paying attention. He'll talk about it, and they'll want to talk about this, so they'll kind of go in this direction. And finally, he gets this chance to sit down with them in this room together and celebrate this long, 1,000-year-old tradition for them as Jewish believers. This thing called the Passover. A chance for Jewish people to think back to when God rescued not just their ancestors, but the language is always that they rescued us. That God rescued me. That God came into that place in Egypt, a place of slavery. And so Jesus has this chance to gather and to go through that whole experience. In fact, as he sits down around this table, he looks at the guys and he says, guys, you have no clue how much I really wanted to be here today. How much I really want to go through this great tradition with you, because there's something about that. There's something about this whole idea that God would help us exit Egypt. That God would invite us to kill this lamb and cover our doors with blood so that death would pass over us and we would be sort of safe and secure. We would be barred from all of that. And then God would not only do that, but he would also take us out of that place. Because the reality is that's what's going to happen here in just a couple of days. And as he's saying that, as they go through the different aspects of that Passover feast, and if they've drunk the wine, and they've eaten the lamb, and they've broken bread, and finally they've come to another time of drinking the wine, Jesus looks at them and says, you know, this is the last time I'm doing this with you for a long, long time. But I'm going to do this because I care about you, because I love you. And then he says some words that catch their attention. And the words are simply this: one of you is going to betray me. To which they say, beginning in verse 21, the apostles began to ask each other which one of them would do that. Now you can imagine the tension in that room that night, right? I mean, as which one of us, and you kind of begin to look at each other, and it's not me, it must be you, and all this kind of stuff begins to go around. Who could do that? Who would do this? Who would do this to Jesus? And as they ask themselves that question, something else begins to take place. And it's a discussion that they've had multiple times. In fact, as Luke records, he says, not only do they begin to ask each other which of them would do that, but then a dispute, that is an argument, occurs among them about which one of them was the most important. Which one of them was the greatest? Because for a lot of them, they had gotten involved with Jesus because they had hopes. They had hopes to be something special, and they had become something special over the course of these 3 years. I mean, they walk into town and people gather around them, and they are like rock stars. They are celebrities in their time. And they've gotten used to that, and they've had this discussion of, okay, who's really kind of, how's this work, in the command, who's the closest to Jesus? We got James and Peter and John. They always say they came close, but I think there's some other people that are more important, and they're having this whole discussion, and they begin to fight about this and have this huge discussion over this, and this is not the first time that they've had this discussion. And then Jesus, I love how Luke puts this, but Jesus said to them, really? Let's go over this one more time. Which, by the way, isn't what Jesus said. I just threw that in there because I think it's probably what he felt when he was talking to them. Because how many times do you have to go over this, Sam, right? How many times do we have to go over the basics? You guys keep fighting over who's the best, who's the greatest, and Jesus keeps saying, you guys don't understand. The greatest is supposed to be sort of the least, the one that thinks he's supposed to be overcharged of stuff, really supposed to be serving everybody, and they keep having this battle. How many times? Really, here I am talking about my death, talking about how this is just going to tear us all apart, how it's going to tear you apart, and you guys want to talk about who really is the greatest among you? And then Jesus begins a discussion that he's had multiple times with them when he says this. The kings of the Gentiles rule that is lorded over them. To which all the guys go, yeah, that's exactly right. That's why we want to know who's the greatest, because we want to know which one of us is going to rule over all this. Because we know it's about power. I mean, it's great to be king because back in their days you had the nobility and you had everybody else, all the peasants. And nobility for generations sets the rules. And everybody else just does their biddings. And they're thinking that's kind of why we're in this. We're part of this group because we're hoping to serve with you and be, important people with you and have these people kind of do what we want them to do. And Jesus says, no. You have to understand, that's kind of how everybody operates. The kings, they lord it over it. And those who have authority over others like to be called friends of the people. That is benefactors. These noble people like to put a little bit of change in your pocket and think that they've done something special and great. And I don't know about you, when I read this passage, I kind of think about where we live here in the United States. And the years of what comes out of Washington, D.C. Kind of this idea of lording it over and kind of wanting to be looked as benefactors. Of the 535 people that serve in our Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Do you know how many of them are not millionaires? Last count I heard, it was an easy number to count. Now, there is somebody on paper that is actually $11 million in debt, so he's very negative. But he also has a salary of $22 million a year, so I think he's going to be okay, all right? But you think about our politics, and that's kind of what Jesus hints at here, is that these people in power, they kind of do whatever they want, and then when they do something that they feel is nice to their base, to the folks back home, it's not about everybody, it's about simply doing something. They want to be viewed as these great benefactors. I've done something for my constituents. Look at the stuff that I brought back. Look at the money I brought back. What is it about position, about power, that gets all of us? Because it does. We all would love to have control for just a day. How many of you ever said that? I'd just love to have control for just one day. Give me a day and I would just change everything. Jesus says, you know that's how it works. People get in those positions and they make everybody else do what they want them to do. And when they do just a little bit for us, they think they've done something great. And Jesus told them this multiple times before. This is not news to them. But he's reminding them again, this is how normal works, but that's not how it's supposed to be. In fact, he makes this incredible statement when he says these words. But you must not be like that. Which simply means Jesus saying this. Guys, that's not what people like us do. So all the guys go, okay. It's kind of what people like us would like to do, but I guess we're not supposed to do it, so okay, Jesus, it's not what people like us do. It's not supposed to be that way about us. Much as we kind of say, yeah, it really is, because there's something in all of us that's sort of about me and kind of, I ought to be entitled to this. I mean, I've spent over 3 years now with you, Jesus. I ought to get something out of this. This idea of entitlement. And we say, in our culture today, this kind of millennial generation is the entitled generation. But the reality is, all of us sort of have this sense of entitlement that runs deep in our veins. When you work hard, you deserve a break. You're entitled to it. It's that picture we have at Easter. How many of you have ever done an Easter egg hunt any time in your life? Anybody? A number of you have, yeah. And how many of you ever done one with a big group of people? Anybody done a big group of people? All right, yeah, sometimes it's families and you get, all these different ages of kids and the adults go out and you got to tell some of the adults not to be so careful about hiding eggs because you can't really hide it in the gutter on the second story of the house because there's no kid that's going to get up there, right? But, you kind of get them into places, and if you got little kids, you put them real obvious. And then you get all the kids together with the little baskets and you say, run out and find the eggs, right? And all the big kids take running out and they're finding all the hard ones. And the little kids, they're going along and they see the egg and, they're getting the egg. And just about the time they get the egg, a big kid comes along and grabs it up, right? And they run over and the kids, crying. They get to the end and all the big kids are gloating because of all the eggs they have. Little kids are crying because they only have, a couple little eggs and they're cracked. And the parents are all mad at each other for why'd you let your kid do that? And this whole entitlement thing. Well, I was entitled to because for finders keeper, or they got to be better, It's what happens in, this great celebration in America that happens the day after Thanksgiving. Right? 5 o'clock in the morning, you've lined up, you waited all night to get in and get that TV for the best price ever. You get your hands on it and somebody else gets their hands on it and it is on, right? Because I'm entitled. I stayed up, I was in the parking lot before you were. And as Jesus says these words to the guys, and they say, well, are we not supposed to be leaders, Jesus? And Jesus said, no, this is not about not being leaders. This is about being different kind of leaders. This is not about what am I entitled to, guys. This is about what do I do with whatever I feel that I'm entitled to. This is about using what you have in a way that's different from the way everybody else uses what they have. And then Jesus asked them a question, and if you've been around, reading the Bible very much, you notice that Jesus oftentimes asks questions, and for the disciples, sometimes I feel bad for them because it's like they're never quite sure how they ought to answer because they're afraid if they say one thing, Jesus might say, no, that wasn't what, they want to look bad. Peter's always a great guy to have around. If you're familiar with the Bible, Peter's kind of the loud, kind of out there, kind of one of the disciples who's always glad to kind of stick his foot in his mouth and be embarrassed, and so they're glad to have Peter around because Peter will ask those questions that nobody else wants to ask. You ever have somebody like that in one of your classes in school? I had a guy like that in college. I loved having him in my class because Wayne would ask the question everybody else had, but nobody wanted to ask. And so here's the question. Actually, before he gets to the question, Jesus says this. That's not how it's supposed to be, guys. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the leader should be like the servant. And we understand the leader-servant, the younger thing we may not understand, but that's kind of a cultural thing that's back, and we haven't had it in the United States in a long time, but sort of used to be that if somebody was older, you respected them. And you respected them simply because they had more mileage on their tires than you did. And so there was this idea that if you're an old person, there was just sort of this general respect, and it was how you treated somebody. And Jesus says that's kind of how it needs to work. This isn't about age, guys. Don't start looking around the disciple groups and saying, well, I'm a couple years older than you. Well, I'm 3 months older than you. That's not what he's talking about here. It's this idea of attitude. But the leader ought to be the servant. And then Jesus asked that question. Who is more important? And I'll ask you this question. Who is more important, the one who is sitting at the table or the one who's bringing them food, the waiter or the waitress? To which I think all the disciples have the exact same answer you do right now. I'm afraid to give the answer because I could be wrong, right? But Jesus is not throwing them a trick question here. Who's more important? The person who's sitting at the table paying the bill or the one that's getting paid to bring the food? The answer is, say it with confidence, folks, you're right. The one who's paying the bills, right? The waitee, not the waiter. In fact, Jesus says, listen, is it not the one sitting at the table? His point is, I'm not trying to trick you guys. I'm asking you a clear question. Who's more important? The one who's getting served or the person who's doing the serving? Obviously, the one who's getting served. That's who's most important. You guys understand this because that's the spot you want to have. But you need to understand something. While that person is considered more important, if somebody wasn't serving them, they wouldn't have anything to eat or to drink or to sit back and enjoy, or really poor customer service that they will complain about for the next week, right? But I, Jesus says, but I am like a servant among you. And he finishes that conversation there. He'll go on and tell them, hey guys, you've been good and you're going to be okay with me. But his big punchline is this. As much as you guys want to be in leadership, as much as you guys want to have power to be able to tell people, do this and they got to do that, as much as you want people to consider you're great because you've stopped and touched them on a shoulder, because you've patted them on the head, because you've dropped a coin in their little bucket. If you miss this idea of service, you've missed it all. Because behind the statement for Jesus is this great, huge theological basis. In fact, that God would come down to this planet, take on human form so he could engage with us and talk with us. And he doesn't come down and he doesn't get to live in the palaces, doesn't get a ride on the Bentleys of chariots, whatever the Bentley of chariot would have been back then. Isn't served all day, isn't everybody waiting him all day. No, he's out in the streets. He's saying, guys, you've been with me. You know that we have not stayed at the nicest places. In fact, oftentimes we just stayed wherever we could find. And you notice I haven't walked into town and let everybody kind of serve me. I've been there to serve them. I've healed people. I've listened to their stories. I've cried with them. I've prayed for them. I've given them eyesight. I've brought people back to life. If you haven't figured it out by now, guys, I'm not sure you're ever going to get it. You keep wanting to know who's the greatest. And I keep telling you, if you haven't figured out who the greatest in this group is yet, you're in trouble. Because none of you are. I'm the greatest. And your job has been to see that I'm the greatest and how I've lived my life is really how I want you to live my life. That's why I say that's not what people like us do. How I live my life is what people like us do, and that is, this is about serving others without any other stuff with it. Now, it would be tempting today to pass out a list of all the different volunteer spots that we have available right at this moment. It'd be tempting to turn up the screws now. To say if you're not serving, you're not a follower of Jesus. I would never say that. I'll leave that to Jesus to say, okay? But I'm not going to tell you that I need, more people here or more people there. I'm not going to tell you how good it would be for you to serve. I just want to remind you something. That your decision, and it really is your decision. That's why this sometimes is so huge but gets so forgotten, because we think, well, it's a decision, so I can make it or not make it and not realize the impact. But your decision to serve is not just about being part of some group or filling a need. Your decision to serve is about you. Because all of us in this room, all of us watching online, wherever we're watching online from, all of us battle the exact same person our whole lives. And by the way, it's not the devil, though that would be an easy answer, all right? The person we all battle happens to be the person who is sitting exactly where you're sitting today. And if you're not sitting there, that's not the person you battle with. You may be thinking, well, I'm sitting next to them, I must. No, it's not them, it's you. And isn't that true? We talk about, well, I wish I was more generous. Wish I was more giving. Do you know how you get more generous and more giving? By doing it, by actually doing it, That's how you break stuff, is by changing how you do it. Sometimes people, well, I just don't have time, and I'm so busy, and I'm all that kind of stuff. I understand that, but you need to understand something this morning. Your decision to serve is not just about, being part of some group that's going and doing something and helping somebody. It's not about filling some need that we might have around here. This is about you. See, according to Jesus, this is a faith issue. And it's a faith in what God is doing and could do and wants to do in and through you. And it can only happen if you decide to hear Jesus prompting to you to follow his example and to volunteer serve. To do something for free, but more than free, to do it with a reason behind it. That I'm doing this because I really want to help somebody. I want to make a difference for that person for maybe just a few moments. Here's the truth. People are watching you. Now, it can kind of sound a little creepy, but it's a true statement, all right? In the best possible sense, people are watching you. See, when you serve, when you do something nice for somebody, it's not just about what it does for you or even to the person you're doing it to. It's also about to the people who see you doing that kind of thing. And I want you to be generous. And I don't want you to be generous simply so that we have lots of money around here. That's not my reason I want you to be generous. I want you to be generous so that it impacts the way you look at life, the way you hold on to things, and the way you share things. I want you to be better than average. Because do you know what the average Christian does in the United States? Who said that? Say it loud, Akila. Nothing. And I want you to be better than average, all right? You know, there's this old adage that 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and 20% of the people carry 80% of the financial load. Of all this kind of stuff, and it has worked out statistically pretty close throughout history, throughout every organization, through all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what average is. But I don't want you to be. I want you to be better than average. And what I mean by better than average, I want you doing something. I'm not going to want you to do everything, because I don't think anybody should have to do everything. But if you're doing something, you're doing better than average, because average is not a great way to be. Lastly, I want you to be great in the Jesus definition. And Jesus' definition of greatness is by being a server. By carving out time, carving out that energy, carving out the desire to go and to give of yourself. Because the truth of the matter is, your time is the most valuable commodity you have. And you will miss all the time in your life where you have just sort of misspent it by waiting. Waiting in the grocery line. I was in one the other day. It was brutal. One line for the whole store. And we waited, and people get up and they can't find their card, and then they can't remember their phone number, then they can't, it's just like, please, that time's gone, that time's gone for me, and that 10 seconds I told you that story, now all gone for you, right? You missed that time. That time's gone. The time you spend waiting in that thing called a waiting room so you can go into this other room to wait a little bit longer. And you will miss the time that you've wasted in life. Those days on Sundays when you don't do anything all day. And you get to the end of the day and think, I haven't done a thing all day long. Oh, I should have done something because I don't feel good about it. But it doesn't motivate you to get up and do anything. I mean, that's all gone. But you need to hear me. You will never miss the time that you gave in order to help somebody else's life. You will never miss the time that you serve somebody else by doing something good for somebody else because of what it does for them and what it does for you. This is all really about attitude. That's why it's more than just simply serving, and it's more than just volunteering. It's about putting those two things together. It's about doing something freely, but with an attitude of, I'm doing this to be of aid. I'm doing this to do of service. I'm doing this so that something will be better in that person's life. So here's the second part. We are here. We are here in this room today because the disciples finally got it. And it was a long, painful. I mean, if you want excitement this afternoon, go home and read your Bible. Good idea. But read the Gospels. Do a little search of greatness and see how many times Jesus talked to them about this idea of, really, guys, you're going to argue over who was great. In fact, one time Jesus catches the guys, they're walking down the road, and he asks them later, hey, guys, what were you talking about? And nobody wants to tell him. Josue, they're all like, we've been arguing and fighting over who's the greatest, but I don't want to tell Jesus that, let's just, nothing, I mean, over and over, Jesus tried to get them, and here they are. I mean, the story we're looking at today is right before he's going to die, and still, they don't get it. But something happened after Jesus died and after he came back to life. Something convinced them that, oh, mama, this is different. This isn't simply about setting up shop in Jerusalem and us all looking good and kind of standing around and having people cheer for us. This is about somebody who died for us and came back to life for us. And now that means everything's much different because now it's not just about here on this planet. It's about a much bigger idea, and that means something different. And if you look at the story, the history of the early church, they start off as really nothing. This is a small group of people. They're not even recognized by the government. They're kind of thought just as sort of part of the Jewish sect. But over time, they become bigger and bigger. And the way they become bigger and bigger is through this one and only thing. It was about how they lived out their lives in acts of service. They would go to the streets where babies were just thrown in the street because they were a girl. We don't want girls. Let's just throw them out in the street, let them die. They would go pick these babies up, bring them back to their house, raise them. People that were sick, they'd bring them to the house, take care of them. Over and over, you hear these stories, you read these stories about people who were getting served, and that's ultimately what changed the whole dynamic of this small group of people that got bigger and bigger, became such a threat to the Roman government that they started killing them because they thought, this is not good. These people are atheists because they believe in some other God than our God. This is not a great thing, but this power took over because these people got it. And because they got it, we're still here today, even though in the midst between then and now, a lot of bad stuff's happened, and we've not always gotten it. Even today, we still sometimes get the idea that because I'm in this position means I can tell you exactly what you got to do. You don't have to do anything. You don't. Because leadership and caring for people is not about demanding or directing or saying this is the way it has to be. It's about saying, what would this look like? What would it look like for you? What would it look like for us if we really were more generous? If we really were better than average? If we really recognize that this whole idea of service is a thing about us, not about them, and it really is a faith thing. So here's my final thing today. I want you to go home and come up with a plan, because you did not come here today with a plan of how to serve. So that's your assignment. Again, I'm not passing out any notes this afternoon to say, here's some ideas, things to get involved with. That's not, because this is not about filling a spot. This is about you cutting your head about what it means to serve, and how is that going to work out in my life? How am I going to carve out time? How am I going to make spots? I mean, I got lots of things. I got lots of ideas. If you know how to do focus groups, come see me. I can tell you that. You know, if you like, kind of outgoing, like to be around people, come see me. We got spots for that. But I'm not going to do that kind of stuff. Because this is not a sales job today. This is about where God has maybe been nudging you in your life. And you're not sure what that nudging has been towards, or not sure how it might fit, because you just don't have a plan. But again, I'll remind you, you have a plan. A lot of you have plans about your finances, about your schooling, about your careers, about your vacations, about your families. But what about serving? Maybe it's something to consider, all right? That said, I invite you to bow your heads as we wind it up today. And let me just say this as we wind this up. We all love to be in the spots where people honor us, people give us good service, where we receive stuff, especially when we feel like we're entitled to it. But I'll remind you again of Jesus' words. That's not what people like us do. It's not the way it ought to be for us. Because for us, we've discovered something different. We've discovered somebody, a God who was willing to come and take a role of different from any other God, to come and not only save this world, but to save us, to redeem us. As Jason said earlier, to buy us back. Because he bought us back, this is not about now giving back and responding to that. This is about recognizing that that's just how God works. God is always looking for ways to bring us back to him. And Father, I'm thankful for that this afternoon. That you looked for ways to find me, and you keep looking for ways to find me. Especially when life gets too much, too hectic, too busy, too crazy, especially in those moments when things aren't clear, when my heart's not in it, my head's not in it, when I think more about vacation than anything else. I'm thankful again that you invite me to walk with you and to follow you. And I pray today you'll give me the energy to do that in your name. Amen.